start recording, and we'll have a few more folks joining us. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to our wonderful panelists. As you may have guessed, this is our very first Career Spotlight Series webinar. This is facilitated by the Center for Career Development, but we could not make this happen without our wonderful panelists. So thank you to all the Wesleyan grads who are sharing an hour of their time. We'll be discussing what humanities, history, international relations, and political science majors have done with their degrees. And we'll be talking about some both general and specific strategies with the goal of having some questions for the panelists and then allowing some time for students as well. So students, if you would like to make sure that you see the panelist's face pop up when they're speaking, you can click the speaker view button at the top. And please, I think all of you have your mic muted. So thanks for having that done for us. So we'll go ahead and get started. Enough about me. I'll love to have our panelists start by sharing their name, their degree that they've earned from Wesleyan and any other universities, and then just a quick 30-second summary of their career journey from graduation to now. So Jake, I see you on my screen first, so I'm gonna hand it to you to kick us off.
No pressure. Hi, my name is Jake, he, him pronouns, and I'm a very proud graduate of Wesleyan in 2017, so I'm like a baby graduate still. Let's see, I had my dual degree in studio art as well as international relations, and for 3 years, come January, I will have worked for New York Presbyterian Hospital in New York as the first 2 years a development associate in major giving, and now I got let's see, I'm a campaign coordinator in donor recognition, also in the Office of Development.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll just kind of go with whichever panelist gets to your mic first. Go ahead and unmute yourself and hop on in. We'll have this be an organic conversation.
Okay, I'll go next. I show as Deborah Moses on the screen. Most everyone affiliated with Wesleyan knows me as Debbie Moses. I'm the opposite of Jake. I'm not a baby alum. I'm class of 1989. I got a double major from Wesleyan in English and history political science. And then I went to law school directly out of Wesleyan and graduated from law school at Vanderbilt in 1992, and then practiced law for about 15 years, actively as a litigator, litigating medical malpractice claims for defendants. And now I'm the Vice President of Risk and Insurance at Piedmont Healthcare in Atlanta, using my law degree in that way. Glad to be with y'all.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bellflower, class of 2018, so an even babier alum. Graduated with a degree in history and religious studies, and I went straight from Wesleyan to getting my MDiv at Harvard Divinity School. And I'm in my 3rd year of the program now.
I will happily go next. I'm Cheyenne Foster, a Green Knight class of 2008. And shortly after I graduated, it was with a degree in international relations and French. I kind of did a weird pivot and have done domestic politics and something that most PoliSci majors would expect to do after they graduated. 2012 was the presidential election, helped out with that, and then moved to DC shortly after, and have been there ever since, doing work as a government employee, working on campaigns, working for the Republican National Committee, and now I am a federal affairs specialist or lobbyist for a big time corporation. So I feel like I've done a lot of the same and a lot of different things, but all definitely in the same city and definitely under the umbrella of politics. So happy to participate today.
Awesome. And Naja, I think you're our next panelist to go.
Oh, okay. Trying to mute
No
myself.
worries.
Okay. My name is Naja. I am a class of 2013 grad. I had degrees in advertising and marketing communications and English. Then I went over to New York and did my MFA, Master of Fine Arts, at the New School in Creative Writing. I started out my journey kind of just struggle busing immediately after graduation. So like ramen all the way. And the little food carts outside of New York, struggle. And then I ended up getting into media, worked as a benefit coordinator for a literary magazine called The Common in New York. And now I am a book scout in training with Liz Gately Agency, and I am working on a Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Book Critics Collective, which will be an online community of emerging and established journalists working towards the greater good of exposing books by writers of color.
Awesome. Thanks all to our panelists for those introductions. I'm excited to hear more. So with that, let's go to our next question. How did you decide what you wanted to do with your degree immediately after graduation? And can you share some specific resources and strategies that you used to land your first job or grad school acceptance after graduating from Wesleyan? And Naja, I see you on my screen, so I'll go ahead and have you kick us off for this one.
Okay. So I actually didn't know immediately what I wanted to do when I graduated. I had kind of this idealistic like plan. I was going to go to New York. I was going to be a writer. It was going to be fast paced. I somehow was going to meet Zadie Smith and it was going to be amazing. And then I got started with it, with my career outside of Wesleyan and my graduate program and looking for internships. And the way that I ended up applying what I learned when I, because that was the second part of the question, right? I'm on kind of the struggle bus with that second part. How did we apply that, right? The way I actually started applying it to get, I guess, my footing in the game was I started like book clubs and things that I did on campus for like, I remember Wesleyan when I was in the English program, they had like these English events that they used to host where you did like little quirky things, book clubs and stuff like that. Something as small as a book club got me in contact with one person who worked at so-and-so publishing company, and then that connection just led to another. So it was like the thing you wouldn't think about. That was how I started applying, I guess, what I learned there, but it's helped both of my paths with AMC and with English, that I also was able to use conversation from courses to help me build relationships with people in New York. I don't know.
That's awesome. Thank you. No, I think that's such an important part, and it doesn't have to be something as formal as a networking event, like you mentioned. It can be following an interest and creating something yourself to create the opportunity. That's awesome. Thank you. I'll turn it over to another panelist who wants to jump in and take a shot at that question. How about Cheyenne?
How about me?
Yes, go for it.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, like I said, my majors were international relations and French, two things I didn't use after I graduated. And that mentality of following your path to the T based on what you studied was very limiting for me and something that took me a little bit to get out of. I think exactly what Naja said, what you participate in outside of class does help you just as much as what you're learning inside of the classroom. And so my participation in things like our College Republicans chapter and the discourse that was happening about politics on campus that didn't necessarily have to do with international relations was what helped me connect, one, with people on campus, but two, with the larger kind of like college network. And I think for any party, you'll know there are a lot of politically active students at Wesleyan, but there are a lot of them across the state. So that turning outward and finding people to connect with on other college campuses is what helped me, one, realize what my options were, but two, find people who are in the same boat as me, who maybe graduated a year or two ahead of me and who said, oh, this was my path after I graduated, and it actually isn't as hard or isn't as difficult to navigate as you think it is. Let's have a conversation. And that kind of opened my eyes up to what my possibilities were. And I think since I've graduated and I have an undergraduate degree, and that's going to be all for me. I wasn't the greatest at school. So congratulations on everyone who's been rocking grad school. I give you major props. But the kind of the knowledge that I had of international relations and French has kind of come back to help me in certain aspects, working on different campaigns or in different jobs where international trade is a big topic of conversation, has been helpful. But I think just the general preparation and liberal arts education that makes you a well-rounded individual is what opens you up to a lot of different things. So that was one thing that Wesleyan really helped me with, was knowing that I didn't have to go down one path. I didn't have to do one track, which has been good because I've taken some really awesome opportunities because of it.
Awesome, thank you. Sarah, I'll tap you in next to answer this question.
Okay, so yeah, I went straight to grad school from undergrad, mostly because I didn't know what I wanted to do other than eventually continue my. So if I don't know what else to do, let's just go ahead and do it now. It was the right decision for me to go straight from college to graduate school, and it's not necessarily the right decision for everyone, but it was for me. As far as resources at Wesleyan, I was in the CCD a lot, many times. I was also talking to my professors a lot about, what I should be doing my last year. And once I got accepted, like what, how to prepare for graduate school, just things like that. And again, like Cheyenne said, having a liberal arts background really does help. Like, I know you've probably heard this a million times, but in my classes at divinity school, there's so many different modes of studying. It's not all just like straightforward religious studies. I've taken a handful of anthropology classes, some that are very history based. I took a class on motherhood in different world religions last semester, and the first part of the semester we were just reading science articles about how we bond with our mothers in the womb. So having a diverse field of study and being able to at least navigate a couple different modes of study is really useful.
Awesome, thanks. And Debbie, I'll tap you in next to answer this question.
Sure. So I think the first part of the question was, how did you decide what to do with your degree afterwards? And I sort of worked backwards a little bit. I did an internship at Wesleyan. First of all, I came to Wesleyan thinking I was going to go to medical school, and pretty quickly decided I just didn't really love science enough to be a medical student, but always was sort of drawn toward that patient interaction type area. And so in sort of struggling with what to do instead, actually the dean on campus suggested that I major in English. because she said, you know, you have some real strength there. And I said, what am I going to do with English? I don't want to be a teacher, no offense. And she suggested law school, and I did an internship at that point and really loved it. And so that became my path. And then I added history just because I have more of a love of history than I do of English. And so that's I sort of backed into my major instead of starting out the way most folks do. And then, so knowing that I wanted to go to law school, I think what really made a difference for me was really working hard at the LSAT and taking about 50 probably practice tests and driving that score up. In addition to, quite frankly, I think Wesleyan was a real asset when I was applying to law schools. I think it was unique and different than a lot of the other institutions that where other folks were coming from. And I think the leadership activities that I'd had on campus when I was there was also a real differentiator for me. So again, my information is not as current, but I think it's probably still somewhat relevant in this arena.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And Jake, I'll have you come up next to answer that question.
Hello. First, I cannot stress enough that I am very successful at this early age purely because of my degrees in international relations and studio art, and because of my liberal arts background. It's been very important for me to be able to sort of adapt to my situations. So I just really want to stress, like, all of y'all watching this, awesome. You know, I mean, you're at the right college, you're going to do great. So I thought, you know, I had it made. I got selected from the Peace Corps when I was a senior in Wesleyan College, and I was pumped. I was going to live in Benin for 2 years in their new program. And, you know, like, at the time I was this beautiful young woman. I was pumped. I felt like really confident. I was ready to get out there in the workplace and just, you know, like, have this really unique experience. And I knew, okay, after those 2 years, I'd come back, be a Fulbright scholar, as if it's that easy, right? You just make the decision and it happens. And then who knows, right? So I had like all these years of my life mapped out. Unfortunately, I had a really serious family medical emergency. And so sometimes, you know, the cards just changed. And here I was, graduated from college, completely had dedicated my life. I was trying to grow my hair out, like all this stuff, to going to live across the ocean. And now I'm back on Long Island in New York, having no idea what to do, hardly knowing myself, right? So that's when I came out as trans and a guy. So figuring out who I was as a person and my gender identity, as well as I'm just entering the workplace. Oh no. So truthfully, I had landed an internship with the YWCA, which focuses on combating racism and inequality versus the YMCA in New York City. So it was not paid, and I had to hop on a train 3 days a week to get into the city from Long Island. So that's a 4-hour commute every day. Right. And then I was also working part-time to pay for those train trips. But that 6-month internship is what got me the position I have now as a campaign coordinator and donor recognition. I found my position with New York Presbyterian Hospital. And I want to say it's because I found NYP, and that's what I wanted. You know, I wanted to go into the hospital non-clinical. No, I sent my tailored resume to at least 30 different institutions. And they were so moved by my resume and my cover letter, they reached out to me. So that's something I really want to stress, like writing and tailoring your resume, like just a few lines here or there, changing that to make where you're applying feel like, wow, this person totally just directly wants to work here. I fell in love with it. Turns out I'm pretty good at development, philanthropy, raising funds. I was in major giving, so I would call donors, help host events, interact with donors, and see where their interests are with the hospital to raise money for those funds then. That's what I did for 2 years, development associate. And then with all of the relationships within the hospital, someone in donor recognition took notice of my work, and we got along very well. And sure enough, they sort of recruited me and promoted me to a campaign coordinator. So now what I do is I work for the major gift officers. Instead of working directly with the donors, I get to help design and fabricate and work with fabricators and our vendors on creating this signage. That's a very long response, but I think I answered the question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And what I really appreciate hearing from what you all said is that decision making is a process, and it happens over small decisions that build up and drive that forward movement. So it's not necessarily an one aha moment that transforms everything. That big moment could happen, but it could also be through smaller decisions and smaller steps that move you forward. So really appreciate you sharing that part of that journey. I think that's a big thing on students' minds right now, as I'm sure it was on your mind. So let's get a bit more specific into the fields that you work in. You work across a wide variety of fields and industries. And so I'd love to have each of you give a brief overview of the field that you currently work in, and then give one specific piece of advice that you would want to give to someone looking to enter that field. So this won't be a full overview, but just kind of a door opener, maybe to future conversations with students who might want to talk to you more about that field and what advice you would give to them. And Jake, if you wouldn't mind, I'll have you go, and then we'll work backwards.
All right. I mean, I sort of explained that, you know, I'm in the Office of Development, and it's philanthropy. It's raising funds for the hospital. Also, we're the number 4 hospital in the entire nation. So just going to plug that in there. Mayo Clinic, we're coming for you. Let's see. I feel like I completely forgot the question already. But for the 2 years, I was working with donors and major gift officers, so directly interacting with those donors. This is where my degrees and every experience I had at Wesleyan really helped. So many people have so many different interests, and so many people give money for so many different reasons. I can't stress enough how important it is to just listen to an individual. Just really, really listen, actively listen, not wait for your chance to speak, but to listen. Writing is everything. So it's funny what Debbie was saying about, oh, you know, English, like, what am I gonna do with the teacher thing? Any writers out there, you're gonna just reign supreme out there. For real, any field or industry you wanna go in, as long as you're a strong writer, you'll be fine. Yeah, anyway, let's see. Yeah, so being able to call on my knowledge in studio art and my knowledge in politics and that international scope really helped me be able to have a wide variety of conversations with a wide variety of different individuals. Yeah. Trying to think. Yeah. Did I answer everything? Help me out here.
You definitely did.
Okay.
Yes, that's awesome. That was 3 pieces of advice for the price of 1. Thank you so much. Awesome, thanks. Sarah, I'll have you come up next.
Okay. So I guess it's weird to say that I work in a field because I'm a full-time student. That's not really a career or work, I guess, in the traditional sense. My specific degree in my program at my school requires that MDivs get 700 to 800 hours of field education, which is split into 2 different units. One is a unit over the length of a school year, and then the second one, or it could be your first one, whichever you want to do first, is over the length of a summer. And I just got done with my second field ed placement, which this past summer, which was at the MIT Office of Religious, Spiritual, and Ethical Life, working with their interfaith group for undergraduates there. And then my first field ed placement was at Boston Rescue Mission, which is Boston's oldest continuously operating shelter for people experiencing homelessness. That first field ed placement was my absolute favorite, and it was totally unexpected. I almost got this placement at the Unitarian Universalist Association, and that didn't happen. And so I don't want to say this was like a last choice, but there was only a few placements left, and this was it. So that really got me into at least interested in the idea of nonprofit work. A lot of MDivs now go into nonprofit work, and I mean, there's a lot of problems with the nonprofit industry. I don't want to call it an industry, but it is. But since I'm graduating in May, that fielded placement really helped me get some guidance about maybe next steps, maybe thinking of getting an MSW, because Boston University has an awesome 18-month program for that. As far as a piece of advice, I guess for entering grad school, I guess. So my school has two programs, the MDiv and the MTS, a Master of Theological Studies, which is 2 years and it's more academic focused. So usually if you want to get like a PhD in theology, that's usually what you do. And MDiv is more like woo-woo feelings, ministry, softer side. And if you had looked at me on paper and looked at my interests and what I said I wanted to do at the time, which is very different from what I want to do now, 2 years can do a lot to a person. You'd probably say, oh, she probably would belong in an MTS program, but and this probably doesn't sound that convincing, but I felt that the MDiv was right for me instead of the MTS. It just felt like a better fit. And even though all my qualifications and my interests pointed to an MTS degree, MDiv was definitely the way to go. So listen to your intuition, I guess, would be a piece of advice. If everything looks great on paper and looks like it should be your next step, but it just something off about it, don't ignore that feeling. Don't think about what you should do or what you have to do. Listen to yourself and trust yourself on that. I'm definitely glad I'm an MDiv, and I'm glad I listened to my intuition on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Debbie, I'll have you come up next for this one.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, my career path was after law school. I worked for a couple of different law firms as a litigator in the medical malpractice arena. So, it's always kind of been the best of both worlds for me because I was interested in medicine but couldn't pull it off myself. But I've learned a lot along the way, and I've worked with doctors and nurses along the way, and it's been interesting and stimulating in that way. So after about 15 years, I transitioned in-house with Piedmont Healthcare. Piedmont was a client of mine, and I transitioned in-house to manage the claims and litigation against the system. And I did that primarily for work-life balance, frankly. And it's worked well for me. And then after a period of time, I moved into the Vice President of Risk and Insurance role. And so now I have two other lawyers who work with me who manage the claims. I'm still involved, but not in the day-to-day activity. And I manage all of the casualty and liability coverages for the system, including we have a captive insurance company that we run ourselves, where we pay for our own professional and general liability claims. And so we really kind of run a small insurance company out of my office, in addition to running the risk management program across the system. I don't know that my advice would be tailored to if you want to become risk management. I think my advice would be more, if you think that there is any reasonable chance that you'll work for a corporation of any kind, be it nonprofit, hospital, or, IBM or Amazon or anything like that, there are, specifically in the corporate setting, I would say that one skill set that's very valuable that I wish I had more of is the ability to do data analysis. That comes into play all of the time, and that is something that, I mean, the only business course I took at Wesleyan was accounting, so I've had to learn data analysis along the way, and I'm not as good at it as I wish I was, and that's really, I think, as we move forward, that's going to only become more and more and more important. And so that's a piece of advice that I would give. I would echo Jake in saying that, if you can really develop the skill to analyze information and communicate that both in written form and in a organized and succinct way verbally, those are other skills that will set you apart from the rest. And those really translate across all lines of work. And, I think probably most Wesleyans have that more than others in the workplace, but those would be the two things that certainly when I'm hiring people, and I do, those are things that make a difference to me, and can set people apart and make one candidate more attractive than another.
Wonderful. Thanks, Debbie. I saw a lot of our panelists head nod in agreement when you said that data analysis piece. Awesome. Thank you. And Naja, how about we'll have you come up for that question.
Okay. Yes, that did. Yes to all of that you just said, Deborah. Oh my gosh. Like my head literally like exploded. I'm like, if I wish, because I had to like teach myself data analysis, and I also had to like take courses later in life just to like, because it's so complex and it's really important. Like I know if you go a little bit deeper at Wesleyan, they do start giving you some like previews of that. Wish I had focused and honed that in more. So like, yes to that. But so media I'm just bridging everything that I pretty much work on now under media, because publishing, you're creating basically just media, I guess. What I'd say is right now the environment is a little rough. Publishing and media is going through a period where we are trying to bring down the patriarchy, man. We're trying to change that image of, cis white male dominance, and we're trying to bring in people of color. We're trying to bring in women. We're trying to amplify voices that are usually suppressed through the same cycles of books that just, it's just the same narrative. So we're trying to bust that up right now, but we are going through a time of change, and it's hard to break into media, and it's hard to be a woman in that environment right now, specifically a woman of color. So a lot of the times you're selling people, you're selling ideas. I would say my specific advice, and it's going to sound crazy because when you're leaving school, the first thing you want to do is, make $1 million. Yay. But my first advice is to volunteer, and volunteer often, and volunteer with the purpose of learning skill sets from whoever you are volunteering with. Because when you work in media, you will need to know everything, because you are selling people and ideas. You need to learn about the ideas. You need to learn about how to market. You need to learn how to talk, work a room, pitch an idea, be clear, concise, and always, always able to network. So something that I would recommend in terms of volunteering is to think, how can I get into, I don't know what you want to do when you leave. With me, it was I wanted to write. but that's, anyone can write. You don't need to have a degree. You don't need to go, half the people who do write don't have advanced degrees. They just decided, you know what, I'm focused, I'm driven, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna produce a book, boom, there it is. But do you want a career in writing? Do you want a career in publishing? If you find yourself saying, well, I do want a career in publishing, but that's all you know, then I recommend shadowing, volunteering to see, do I want a career in editorial? Do I want a career in marketing? Do I want a career in PR? Like, hook under what you want a career in, look up opportunities, but not just that, but actually look up the people who are heading those things and reach out to them on LinkedIn, reach out to them through email. Most likely, because we're vain, we probably have a website somewhere. Find, Joe Schmo at blah, blah, blah.com, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a recent graduate from this college and from Wesleyan. I'm a recent graduate from Wesleyan and I have no clue what I'm doing, and you are the boss at what you're doing. Stroke the ego a little bit and then say, do you mind being my mentor? Can I shadow you? Chances are about 80% of the time, because you stroke their ego, because they thought, wow, am I really that important? They're going to be like, yeah, let me get your number. Let's exchange some information. Even if nothing comes of it beside the fact that you at least reached out to them, they have your name. If they come up with an opportunity or they come up with something, they'll say, oh my goodness, this person who's so amazing, blah, 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 just reached out to me. They're so great. Let me just connect you with them. Or they'll say, hey, I'm having an event, especially in New York. It always happens like this. Hey, I'm having an event at like the Plaza. I don't know. Do you want to show up? I have some free tickets. Boom. Next thing you know, you're in the room, you work the room, and you get in there and you don't think, I have to always be getting money, which I understand the panic. Work retail at Gap while you do what you got to do to network, to get your foot in the door. It's okay, but do it with a heart full of, I want to learn instead of I want to gain, because you gain through learning and being genuine and going into opportunities with an open heart and mind. So yes, that is my specific piece of advice in my terrain. It's not all bad though. There are people out there, which I can definitely hook you up with some opportunities if you want to know about it. There are opportunities out there to get into publishing and media that are geared towards women in particular. Like my publication is going to be geared towards women and non-binary folks. Yes. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's awesome. And Cheyenne, have you close us out for this question?
Yes, I'm actually glad I'm going after Naja, because what she brought up is very important. When you take the time to volunteer and put yourself not at the mercy of others, but at the mercy of the learning process instead of the gaining process, it allows you the ability to capitalize on the opportunities that you aren't expecting. And I think I would say 85% of my professional opportunities have come because I've met somebody and worked with somebody in a non-professional capacity, and I remember who they are, I remember what they like, and then that relationship comes back and is super beneficial later on. And the current job I have now, I am the newest member. I've been there for about a year now, but I'm the youngest by 10 years. So it's been kind of an adjustment for me personally, being like a young single woman in a federal lobbying team of older and well-established people. But the reason that they hired me as this junior lobbyist is because they are 40 and older and have their own set of professional connections and have worked in the industry for a very long time. But Congress, other than the member of Congress who is usually about the same age, Congress is pretty much run by people ages 35 and younger. They're the ones putting in the long hours, reading policy, creating policy. They're the ones sending out the tweets, the press releases. I mean, they're doing it at the direction of their boss, but they're the ones putting in the long, hard hours to do everything short of voting and then participating in a town hall. So when I joined the team, the idea was that I had all of these connections that I had built over the 7 years that I've lived in DC, and that I could leverage those to help broaden the network that our federal lobbying team had. And I personally work for Koch Industries, and they own a bunch of subsidiaries, Georgia Pacific in Georgia, a tech company called Molex, an IT company called Infor. The list goes on, but obviously Koch is most well known for oil and gas. But I always joke that that's their bread and butter and what got them started. But almost everything you touch in your home or in your car or what you do day to day is in some way produced or manufactured by a Koch subsidiary. So we do a lot, and I don't necessarily know energy policy terribly well. I'm not very good or up to snuff. I don't have a master's degree in that kind of information or that kind of policy, but my day-to-day is following up with those relationships that I've built, leveraging them for my team. I didn't major in this, but it's super helpful, and a talent that I developed when I was younger that has really come in handy professionally. I golf often. I go to happy hours often, galas, receptions. I sit in and have conversations with the 22 to 35-year-olds that my boss is just not going to be able to do at 9 o'clock at night at a bar downtown in DC, because he's got a family and a lot of other things and kind of almost more important conversations that he's supposed to have. So I feel like the point to take away here that can go for any party, I should say, because I have worked in conservative politics, but it's been a very long 4 years. But my relationships go across both aisles. Koch specifically, because they are pro-business and pro-free market. In fact, have a lot of relationships with members of the House and Senate on the other side of the aisle. But the most important thing, and as hard as it's been for an introvert like myself, is putting yourself out there and remembering that people are human, and that what they do from 9 to 5 is their job. And yes, that's why you're networking with them. But if you can find the things that you have in common personally, and if you can remember those things, and to go back to what Naja said, if you're sending an email to someone who you want to connect with and who you want to mentor you, if you do something as simple as saying, I listened to a podcast you did with such and such company, and I really found it interesting that you said the following things. And that got me thinking about a time when I was at Wesleyan College and did XYZ. I would love to have a conversation with you about that. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, yes, you stroked my ego because you listened to something I participated in, and you also remember. So you obviously think I'm important enough to remember any sort of detail about me. And that kind of opens the door to not say, hey, I want to be at your beck and call, which you may be if you end up shadowing them, or if they provide some sort of mentorship or internship for you straight out of college. But it almost puts you on the same playing field, because you say, hey, I see an idea and I see the work that you're doing that I understand. I would love to talk to you about that. Let me have a conversation with you about where I come from on this issue, or on this piece of work, or on this idea. And I would love to continue working with you on what you've got going on, or continue the conversation, et cetera. So, and that's specifically for politics. The one thing that I think I've spent the past, even at Wesleyan, it was really hard to find common ground from one side to the other back then. And I don't think I was mature enough to do it well, as mature as I am now to do it incredibly well. But working in a city that's very divided, and the people here aren't even from DC, but it kind of like just becomes the personality of DC. This is the one thing that I will actually end this comment with. You need to be you need to constantly remind yourself that people are human, and you can have some really angry opinions or really strong beliefs, or really intricate and complex ideas about the way that the country works and the world works. What effects religion has plays a factor within yourself and within the rest of the political conversation. But what you shouldn't do is put that in writing. So like my biggest recommendation is clean up your Twitter or clean up your Facebook. My second recommendation is be careful of who you're freely expressing those opinions with, because you never know what kind of person they are. And number three, always remember that things are not black and white. And I've had a recent experience. I'm personally trying to pivot into a different sphere. I'm very, very into soccer, played soccer in college, played soccer at Wesleyan, and have been a season ticket holder for the local team here forever. And what I love about it is I get to use those tickets now as a business expense. So I don't have to pay for them out of my own pocket. But I've started doing a little bit of media in that sphere. And the soccer community is very much like Wesleyan. It's very, very progressive. And those conversations I love having, and those experiences I love learning from. Again, to use exactly what Naja said, like learning as opposed to gaining, which is really important. But I think because everyone thinks the conversation or the world or even the nation is so black and white, it's hard to see, for someone to see me on LinkedIn, or for someone to see my job history, or to see that I may have conservative or Republican next to my name, and for them to not project everything on to everything that they know about that kind of ideology onto me. And so I think humanities, and literally every major that we're talking about today, has some sort of political influence or some sort of political conversation attached to it. And all of the work that everyone's doing does talk about marginalized communities that have been marginalized, not just socially, but also politically, people whose voices need to be heard, ideas and concepts that need their own space within the landscape, and that often becomes political. So I think opening your eyes to a dialogue where you can have conversations with anybody, not necessarily agree with anybody, but always think of things professionally in a, I may not necessarily like it, what it is that I'm seeing here, but how can I change it? And how can I bring my comprehensive knowledge or my liberal arts education, my problem solving skills to the table to bring about change, instead of contributing to the like us versus them or black versus white conversation. Because I think the world is a lot more complex. And even I realized this after graduating from Wesleyan. Ideology and reality is very, very different. So the beauty of Wesleyan is that you're kind of armored with a lot more knowledge than I think most college students are today. And in fact, graduating and realizing that there were a lot of people who had the same major as I did and yet had to do like a quarter of the work was infuriating. Like I never opened Facebook when I was like in class. I never even opened my laptop. I never even took my laptop. But there were people that just like lived on their computers during their classes. So you have an extra set of skills, you have an extra set of knowledge. I would just recommend making sure that you're approaching everything with that context always in the back of your mind, and not shutting yourself off to opportunities just because they don't necessarily fit in your brain or fit in your schedule or fit in your worldview at that moment, if that makes sense. That was really long. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks to all of you for talking through those strategies and overviews. Yeah, I heard a lot of really good themes in what you all said, and that actually addressed some of the questions I had scheduled for us later on. So knowing that, I would love to see if any students on this webinar have a question that you want to throw out to the panel. You can type that question into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Anyone have a question for either a couple of panelists or a specific one?
I have a question for Sarah. Hi, Sarah. I'm also an international relations major and I'm a senior, and I'm also planning to apply for grad schools. And I wanted to ask you how the transition was for you, since Wesleyan is so small and you went to Harvard, which is like a big school. So if you could say anything about that.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you. So I lived in Georgia my entire life and obviously went to college in Georgia, and then 2 weeks after graduation, I'm moving to Boston, which was a lot to take in. Obviously I don't know like your situation, but for me, coming from like middle of nowhere to Macon and then to Boston was a lot. As far as the size of HDS is actually Harvard's smallest graduate school. There's like 300 students, but I mean the entire Harvard community and obviously Cambridge and Boston area are huge. So that honestly, like class sizes wasn't that much to get used to. Like I did have a couple classes where it's 60, 70 people, but you know, that really wasn't a huge hurdle. It's just, oh, there's more people in this room. We had TFs and stuff if we needed more one-on-one attention. I feel like a bigger hurdle was kind of learning how I would be in a grad school setting. Like, because I came straight from college to grad school, I kind of assumed, oh, I'll have the same habits, I'll have the same like modes of study, the same way of making community. It'll be a little different, but mostly the same, but that was totally not the case. I like one very specific example was like the first time I had to take a test when I was taking a German class last summer, and I was taking the first test and I froze and I did absolutely terribly on it because I had not taken a test since my first semester of my sophomore year. And I was like, oh, I have test anxiety now. That's a fun thing to learn about myself as I'm here taking this test. Things like that. And just kind of getting in the rhythm of class structure being different. Instead of like 2 or 3 times a week for maybe an hour, it's like 2 to 3 hours once a week. And like getting, finding a community and getting into the rhythm of being a part of that community, which is going to be different at all places because, you know, size and program and, you know, MDivs are really like gushy and lovey anyway. So we're all about forming community and such. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Sveta. Any other questions from the student attendees? Okay, awesome. So we have just 5 more minutes and I want to make sure we maximize our time here. Let's see. Could I have each of the panelists maybe briefly touch on a myth about your major that you would like to debunk for students? Actually, I'll broaden that. A myth about your major or a career decision making that you'd like to debunk for students.
I'll go. A myth about, well, since I have 2, I'll give a quick myth both. So I guess a myth about being an English major, debunked that you have to go into a career as a professor because some people just aren't geared for lifelong academia. I definitely was not. And a myth for AMC is that you have to be excellent at design. You could be okay at design and still gather more from or learn more. Like, you don't have to be great at design. You could just learn the copy and the marketing aspects of that major and really do well in stuff like PR or marketing as an assistant, probably starting, but yeah.
I'll go next. I mean, this might be one area where being the old person on the call gives me a little bit of, a few years of perspective. But what I would tell you is, no matter what you think your career path is going to be, and I mean, I think Jake somewhat commented on this earlier, that, things don't always go as you planned, sometimes for not so good reasons, and sometimes because an opportunity too good comes along. But I would just tell you to be open. I just muted myself, sorry. I would encourage you to be open-minded and to embrace opportunities to gain new skills. It's easy to think, oh, that's not really going to play into what I'm going to do in life, so I don't really need to know about that. Ergo, my data analysis example earlier, I wouldn't have dreamed that would be something that I didn't really think about it, but I wouldn't, if it had come along, I probably wouldn't have seen that as a skill I needed. So I would just say that you don't know where your career is going to take you. So be open-minded, not only with regard to opportunities, but with learnings that you might gain along the way.
Awesome, thanks. Anyone else want to hop in here? Maybe Sarah?
Sure. Yeah. So for my history degree, probably that you can only use it to become a teacher. There are so many great things to do with history degree. For a brief moment, I was thinking about park service, and for a not so brief moment, I was thinking of getting a master in library and information sciences. Still might do that, but like in 10 years or so. But that's up in the air. As for religious studies and going into divinity school in particular, the big one is you have to be very religious, specifically Christian, to do religious studies or go to divinity school. There's certainly a lot of divinity schools that are primarily seminaries and are very Christian, but personally the one I go to is non-sectarian, and there are plenty of others that are non-sectarian. I almost went to Vanderbilt. They're a great non-sectarian divinity school, and that if you do go to divinity school, even if you're not Christian, you still need to be somehow very devout religious person, and you're going there to be ordained. And I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I definitely would not call myself devout in any way, and I am definitely not getting ordained in anything. And there's so much more to it than religious studies. My history degree has helped me so much in div school, especially if you're interested in American history. Like, I cannot think of a single event in American history that was not either informed by or caused changes in religious ideology in this country or in the places we touch. Is so many times I've used my history degree in my religious studies classes. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Cheyenne, any myths you want to debunk?
I think this is just a general myth, and this is my own bias, so I'm just going to say it. Your grades don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have perfect grades. And in fact, this is actually something I, for some reason, feel really prompted to share. Suffered with some really, really major mental health issues my entire life, but as a college student, being on my own for the first time I thought I was like doing really well at it. I was not, looking back. And I kind of refused to seek help or admit that I needed help, et cetera, et cetera. So looking back at it, I think what I've known now is that I think I would have done so much better had I found some good mental health resources. So if anyone is thinking about that right now, I highly recommend it. It's not a bad thing to admit that that's something that you deal with, because to me it is just like a physical ailment, and it does not need to be stigmatized the way it's been. For that reason, my grades were not that great, but I loved learning, which is why you go to college. And when I graduated, did not put my GPA on my resume for that reason. I think, to Jake's point, a fantastic cover letter and a tailored resume is imperative. And one of the biggest things I learned working in Congress, I worked for two members of Congress. One was a chairman of a committee. And so that technically put him as a member of leadership. You think that you have to be knowledgeable on policy. You think that you have to be an expert in order to inform your boss or be able to participate in a congressional office, but you really don't. I scheduled, so just by nature of being a type A organized person, thrived at my job. There are communications positions, there are policy positions, there are operations positions, there are administrative positions. There's so much more than just knowing about bills. So those are all things you can be really good at without having to get an A in your non-major courses. So just learn. If you can regurgitate that knowledge and apply it in the real world, then I think you shouldn't beat yourself up too much if you didn't get as good of a GPA as you wish you had. Is what I'm telling myself. I'm looking at myself while I'm telling myself this.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. Yes, good point. And Jake, can you close us out with this question?
Yeah, I know this is humanities, but studio art people, it's not famine or feasting. Like, you can actually put your heart into it and get work and live as an artist professionally. Just want to throw that out there. And there's a lot of different careers out there that I wish I had known that I didn't expect. Backing up Cheyenne, what she was saying, let's see, international relations. I feel like for me, the myth was anytime I said, yeah, that's my major, what? And now with what I do for work, I tell someone, they're like, what? So, you know, be open to the ambiguous, be open to everything going differently. Yeah, my grades are like, college, I was much better, don't get me wrong, but the experiences and how you convey what you've learned from those experiences, that's what really shines through. Yeah, I think that's how I'll end it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I think we have one question for Debbie in the chat. I want to make sure we get to that.
Yeah, thank you. We had a question for Debbie about the data analysis side of your job, and we can maybe connect you and this student as well afterwards, but maybe Debbie, briefly, can you just touch on that data analysis piece and maybe a way that you learned more about that even after graduating?
Yeah, sure. So, and I had actually, I'll try to finish it. I'd actually typed in, I'm happy to, I'm going to have to run in just a second because somebody's trying to get in my door, but I'm happy to talk directly with the student. I'm sorry, I'm so distracted trying to do 3 things at once. But, you know, I think in healthcare, there's a lot of data analysis that's done, and I just tried to work alongside other folks that have experience in that area. But I think, and I see that your applied data analysis major, and so I think you're certainly going to be ahead of the game. But there's need for that in, you know, whether it's supply chain issues in a grocery store or, you know, all kinds of issues within healthcare. So I'm happy to talk with you offline too if you think that would be helpful. But you know, I can't think of an industry really. There probably is one somewhere, but where data analysis is not key, and having that ability, particularly if you can pair that with not only the ability to analyze the data, but to explain it, again, either written or verbally, in a way that is understandable by both industry leaders and lay people. That's sort of the, you know, the perfect combination for the work world. So I would encourage you to, you know, try to make sure that you've got strength in both of those areas. You probably do, given the double major that you're in. That sounds like a good combination that should set you on a good footing for corporate world.
Awesome, thank you. Well, and on that note, we'll end this webinar officially. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for giving your time and your knowledge. I know we just touched on just a wealth of information that each and every one of you has. And so students, if you want to connect with other Wesleyan alums, the CCD can help you do that through LinkedIn or through the mentor platform on Purple Briefcase. Many of these alums have profiles on there. And so just a huge thank you to all of our panelists. I tell students all the time how supportive the Wesleyan community is and how eager to help our alumni are, and this is just a fantastic indicator of that. So thank you so much for your time and knowledge. I'll stick around for a few more minutes after, and we'll end the recording now, but I'll be around for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions or just wants to chat. So thank you so much again, appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.